My name is David Plyler. I'm with the Concert Office in the Music Division at the Library of Congress. And I'm incredibly excited about this two-day experience that we're going to have with the Diotima Quartet. They're quite astounding, and they're playing literature that we don't get to hear that often, but almost every single piece that's on each of the two programs is held in manuscript at the Library of Congress. And so this is it's a very special thing for us to be able to present it. Excuse me. But it's also, it's a nice thing for the musicians to be able to experience, have a chance to spend some time with the manuscripts as well and kind of get to know the music from the inside out, as it were. And they've been working with us all week, playing our Stradivari instruments. And so you'll get to hear them in a very special context. I don't think these particular pairs of programs have been played on Stradivari instruments that often. So, but tonight, yep, yeah. But tonight we have a very special guest who's going to be speaking and giving a lecture this evening, Harvey Sachs, who has written a book called Schoenberg, Why He Matters. This is his 12th book, and it was completed in 2023. I'm just going to say a couple things about it. There's a lot to say about Harvey. It has been hailed in the New York Times Book Review as one of the 100 notable books of 2023. And also in the book review, composer John Adams described the book as an immensely valuable source for anyone desiring an accessible overview of this endlessly controversial and chronically misunderstood giant of 20th century music. Music critic Tim Page, writing in the Wall Street Journal, praised Sachs's personal asides, which give a reader a sense that a brilliant teacher is not only leading us through the music, but discovering it once more for himself. Washington Post book critic Michael Dirda wrote, in his brisk and engaging biography, Sachs makes a compelling case for some of the most difficult and intimidating music ever written. And I would take an aside to say that this is the book. It's a very fun read. You don't need to look at, I think that one of the great takeaways is that one does not need to be scared by this music. And in fact, it's incredibly emotional music and quite compelling, which I think you'll find in the performances. So in any case, Sachs is on the faculty of the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, and he has held fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the New York Public Library's Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And he is a former Leonard Bernstein Scholar in Residence of the New York Philharmonic. There are over 80 editions in 17 languages of Sachs's books. So he's well-read, and we're so pleased to have him here. He's a very kind man and a wonderful scholar, so we're looking forward to it. Please join me in welcoming Harvey Sachs.
Thank you very much. I'm honored and pleased to be here, and this 150th anniversary of Schoenberg's birth has really, I think, given the public in general a chance to hear more of Schoenberg's works than are generally performed. I thought I might begin by talking a bit about how the public generally reacts to Schoenberg, or has in the past. How this book came to be, I think I want to talk a moment about that, because I have to tell you, I don't consider myself a Schoenberg expert. I was asked to write this book. My field before I wrote this book was principally early 20th century performers. I wrote a biography of Arturo Toscanini. I wrote one of Arthur Rubinstein. I wrote a history of music in fascist Italy. I also wrote a book on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. But, all more or less traditional music makers, composers, performers, and so on. And this book was a request, and I thought, am I really going to step into this territory? I had, of course, heard Schoenberg's music, but I never belonged to either camp, the Schoenbergians or the anti-Schoenbergians. I was curious, and I decided in the end that what I would do in writing this book is to approach it as someone who is curious about it and not take sides in the eternal argument about whether this is music that is a continuation of the Western musical tradition or that something that has driven a wedge into the public's ability to appreciate contemporary music. And so that was how I came to do it. One event that I did in Los Angeles last year, Schoenberg's grandson, Randy Schoenberg, said to me, he was the moderator, and he asked, how is it that someone who has dedicated his life to studying music, various musical subjects, has only come to Schoenberg in his 70s? And I said, I can tell you in one word: laziness. And so for me, doing this book became a kind of challenge to get out of my comfort zone and try to do something, for me, new. And that's the origin story. I thought I would begin by reading the first paragraph of the foreword in my book, because it sort of encapsulates the situation. Arnold Schoenberg's place in posterity has yet to be determined. As I write these paragraphs, nearly a century and a half after Schoenberg's birth and more than 7 decades after his death, I have no choice but to declare that his works, with few exceptions, have not been widely accepted, even within the relatively small segment of the world's population that loves Western art music. Schoenberg's 12-tone compositional technique or its offshoots were virtually obligatory among composers struggling for recognition in the third quarter of the 20th century, but they have been either abandoned or drastically altered, often beyond recognition, by most younger composers, and few professional observers can imagine a major change in the situation. Gustav Mahler, one of Schoenberg's mentors, proved to be right when he said, in the face of widespread disinterest in or opposition to his own compositions, "My time will come." Of Schoenberg, on the other hand, many would say that his time has come and gone. His music and his musical experiments left an extremely strong imprint on the professional lives of several generations of musicians and musicologists, and they continue to fascinate many people in the profession. But they also continue to meet with apathy and often downright antipathy on the part of most listeners. And then I gave a list of a few of the major orchestras' performances of Schoenberg's works during the last full pre-pandemic season, 2018-19. Berlin Philharmonic played one piece, the Violin Concerto. Boston Symphony Orchestra, 0. London Symphony Orchestra, 0. New York Philharmonic, 0. Philadelphia Orchestra, 0. Vienna Philharmonic, Schoenberg's hometown orchestra, 0. Now, this is perhaps about to change because this year, because of the 150th anniversary, a lot more of his music is being performed publicly. What the effect will be, I don't know. It's impossible to say. I know that, for instance, the New York Philharmonic programmed his early tone poem, Pelléas und Mélisande, a few weeks ago, and people just seeing the name Schoenberg, as the second half of the program, left in droves during the intermission, not realizing this is a tonal piece. It sounds, it's in the same, let's say, family as Mahler and Richard Strauss. There's nothing in it to be afraid of. And yet, just seeing that name there made people leave the auditorium. So, it's still an open question. Schoenberg, was born in 1874. Of course, this is the 150th anniversary. He died in 1951. And we can talk about 3 periods in his career. There are composers, and this is a great boon for musicologists, whose lives or careers divide very nicely into segments. Mozart and Brahms, no. They wrote in the same harmonic, their emotional content in their works changed, but they wrote basically in the same harmonic idiom throughout their careers. Whereas with, let's say, Beethoven, Stravinsky, Verdi, we can easily divide their careers into 3 separate periods. I'm not separate because they didn't know that there were 3 periods in their careers when they were writing. But we talk about Beethoven's early period, the heroic or middle period, and the late period, the late quartets, the Missa Solemnis, the Ninth Symphony, and so on, the last piano sonatas. Verdi, there are the early works, and then there's the 1850s with Rigoletto and Trovatore and Traviata and so on. And then there are the late works. We could start with Don Carlo and Aida, but especially Otello and Falstaff. If you listen to Otello and you listen to, let's say, I Lombardi from the early period, they sound like they were written by 2 completely different people. And so with Schoenberg, it's the same kind of story, we can say, because there is the first period, which is the tonal period, even though he was at times pushing tonality to limits. Still, if you listen to a piece like Verklärte Nacht, the string sextet, or Pelléas und Mélisande, or the Gurrelieder, you're hearing works that are absolutely tonal. Take the Gurrelieder, for instance. He was doing something that was unusual in that he was out-Mahlering Mahler at that point. When he started writing or orchestrating the Gurrelieder, which are the songs of Gurra, it's a Danish legend that he adapted for this huge orchestral vocal piece. He had special 48-staved music paper printed with the intention of scoring the Gurrelieder for an orchestra of a size that not even Strauss had employed up to that time. 4 flutes, 4 piccolos, 3 oboes, 2 English horns, 3 clarinets, all 3 switching between instruments in B-flat and A, 2 E-flat clarinets, 2 bass clarinets, 3 bassoons, 2 contrabassoons, 10 horns with the 7th through 10th doubling on Wagner tubas, 6 trumpets, bass trumpet, alto trombone, 4 tenor trombones, bass trombone, contrabass trombone, tuba, 6 timpani, percussion, including tenor drum, snare drum, bass drum, large iron chains, cymbals, glockenspiel, ratchet, tam-tam, triangle, and xylophone. Then 4 harps, celesta, and a huge string section made up of 20 first violins, 20 seconds, 16 violas, 16 cellos, and 12 double basses. In addition, there were to be 3 4-part male choruses, an 8-part mixed chorus, a narrator, and 5 solo singers, soprano, mezzo-soprano, 2 tenors, and bass baritone. Now, here is this guy who was practically unknown and was starting to, create compositions, who writes this piece that nobody in 1903 or thereabouts would have performed. And this is, in a way, typical of Schoenberg's approach to his work. He didn't care. He felt that he had something that was very important to say and to produce, and if the world was against him, that was their problem. It was his problem economically, of course. I mean, he spent his entire career sometimes very near poverty, and of course having to teach almost through his entire lifetime. That was his way of surviving for himself and his, I always say, excuse me, 2 families, because he was married twice. He had 2 children with his first wife. She died. He married a much younger woman and had 3 children with her, all 3 still alive in their 80s and 90s now. So he was constantly struggling for survival. But anyway, having talked a bit about the Gurrelieder, I want to give you an idea of the sort of thing that he was doing. He wrote the Gurrelieder, the main arias or lieder, songs, initially for voice with piano, and then orchestrated and amplified the work completely. But I want to give you an idea. I'm going to play the piano version, piano vocal version, and then the orchestral version.
Im Rücken uns der Forst zu düsterem Fall zusammenfließt, aber noch viel jagen uns zu. Sie, des Waldes Schatten,
Going to go on now to the orchestral
überflur sich der Weg hurtig unter der Hose drinnen. Aber noch stärker musst du eilen, bis noch in des Waldes Mitte, und ich wende unverweilte, schwenk ich gleich in Gurre ein. Nun weicht der Wald, schon seh ich dort die Burg, die Tore mir umschließt, indes im Rücken uns der Forst zu finsterem Wald zusammenfließt. Aber noch wilde Jagd und Hoh. Des Waldes Schatten die.
Okay, so Wagner, right? Did you hear Wagner in there? A lot. And some Strauss too. But it also has a very personal tone to it as well. But as you hear, pure tonal music, nothing that could have shocked anybody who had listened to Wagner's music and Strauss's music and Mahler's music at that time. By the time he orchestrated it, finished orchestrating it, and had it performed, I believe 1911 or 13, I forget which, the audience that heard it in Vienna liked it, and they applauded him, and he refused to accept their applause because they didn't like what he had written since then. And this is also typical of his the self-destructive side of his nature, where he always had to feel that he was in the opposition, that he was a minority struggling for recognition. And I think that in a way he got more satisfaction out of his catastrophes than out of the relatively few triumphs that he had. It sort of made him feel vindicated. He came from he was born in Leopoldstadt, the Jewish quarter of Vienna, and at a time when the intellectual and artistic ferment within Vienna was largely, or at least the people we remember today, were from the Jewish quarter. And the Jews, of course, were disliked. I mentioned in the book the joke that the Jewish community in Vienna used to tell at that time was, the Viennese definition of anti-Semitism is disliking Jews more than is strictly necessary. And, it was this feeling of being in the opposition and yet somehow rising to a form of intellectual and artistic dominance in the city. And so, Sigmund Freud to start with. And, in music, you had the violinist Fritz Kreisler and the singer Richard Tauber, and Mahler, of course, was the conductor of the Staatsoper, or what was then the Hofoper, the court opera before the First World War, etc. These were people who were dominant in the culture and yet, in a way, disliked by the public at large. And so this was in his blood, in a way. I am the opposition. And that was a very strong part of his character. I want to play just a bit of an excerpt from the Chamber Symphony number 1, which he wrote in 1906, and which sort of marks the end, almost a transition to the middle or atonal period in his career. It's not atonal, it is strictly speaking tonal, but it's almost over the edge. But on the other hand, to me, it's a sort of really new phase in his approach to music, because instead of the massive textures of some of the previous works, he's doing something completely different. I'll just read you a bit from the book. He wrote in 1906, he wrote his extraordinary Kammersymphonie, Chamber Symphony number 1 in E major, with which, in the opinion of this writer, he truly became Arnold Schoenberg, a 20th century composer. In all of his previous works, including the recent string quartet, no matter how bold his harmonies or how radical his authorial voice may have sounded to audiences of the time, today's listeners can perceive above all else the dense textures and the 19th century Schwärmerei, overblown passions. They would reappear with the addition of some Freudian-era angst in many of his subsequent works, but the Chamber Symphony, scored for only 15 solo instruments, swept away the dust and cobwebs that had burdened Schoenberg's style until that moment. The emotion is as intense as in his earlier works, but the doors and windows have been flung open and fresh air has entered the house. Just as his architect friend Adolf Loos was about to shock Vienna with the externally unadorned, internally luminous Goldmann und Salach building, now called the Loos House, in the city's center, so Schoenberg shocked local music lovers by suddenly turning away from the gigantic orchestra and vast proportions of Mahler's symphonies and Strauss's later tone poems and recent Sinfonia Domestica, and of his own Gurrelieder and Pelléas. Instead, he presented a symphonic work of slim proportions and pared down instrumentation. So let's hear a little bit of the beginning. So, you know, motivically and harmonically, this is a traditional piece of music. It's kind of far out as far as the use of harmony is concerned, but it's not, how shall we put it? It's not intended as a breaking point of any sort. It's part of an ongoing process in his creative development. And this continues through the atonal period, which begins, usually we say the last movement of his second string quartet has no key signature. It's the beginning of the official or unofficial, I guess, beginning of his atonal period where there is no key center. And that goes right through the period of the First World War up to the very early 1920s, the pieces that he wrote during that period, including some very important ones like the fragment that we have of the Jakobsleiter, Jacob's Ladder, which incidentally the Berlin Philharmonic is about to publish a Schoenberg edition that includes a performance of that particular piece. Then in the early 1920s, he hit on a new system. Now, here, if you'll allow me, I'm going to go back to my book because a lot of people seem to have the impression that what some of the avant-garde composers of that time were doing was kind of it was throwing out discipline out the window. And that's not at all what people like Schoenberg and his sort of antithesis Stravinsky had in mind. And what I wrote here is, the fact bears repeating. Neither Schoenberg nor Stravinsky was interested in an anything goes approach to composition. Stravinsky, however, continued through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s to work within a highly personal version of the old tonal system, whereas Schoenberg was determined to establish a system of composition that would provide a new order of rules and formulae. As early as December 1914, or shortly thereafter, he had set down ideas for a symphony that would contain in its scherzo movement a theme that would make use of all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. Skip a bit here. Then on a summer evening in 1921, his student, Josef Rufer, went for a walk with his teacher at Traunkirchen in Upper Austria, where the Schoenberg family and some of Arnold's disciples were staying. And in the course of their stroll, the master told the pupil, "Today I succeeded in something by which I have assured the dominance of German music for the next century." What he had created was a system that he called a method of composition with 12 tones related only to each other. Now, non-musicians who find the terms 12 tones, dodecaphony, serialism, and the like arcane or even off-putting need not worry. Schoenberg himself considered such nomenclature superfluous. He opposed analyses of 12-tone rows because, he said, and this is a quote, "This leads only to what I always fought against, the realization of how it was done, while I always aimed for the recognition of what it is!" Exclamation point. In other words, people should listen to music for its intrinsic expressive value without having to think about how it was put together. And yet, for the sake of non-musicians who are curious about the matter, it is interesting to learn what the 12-tone system was. But I am not going to go into that here. This is not a theory lesson. So, I guess given the amount of time we have, I'm going to skip this next bit, which is very much worth listening to. Moses und Aaron was his unfinished opera. He wrote 2 acts of it. He intended to write a 3rd act, but never got around to it. And if you read the text that he wrote for the 3rd act, you'll figure out why he never wrote it. It's extremely philosophical and verbose, and it wouldn't work for the stage. And I think maybe he came to that conclusion, maybe not. But in any case, he only finished the first 2 acts. And there are some remarkable bits in the opera. I mean, the whole opera should be listened to. But some of the things that he does, for instance, giving the part of Moses himself is not sung, it's spoken. Aaron does the singing, Moses' brother does the singing part in their conversations. And Moses, according to the Bible, had a speech defect. And so Schoenberg takes that he uses the idea of having him speak instead of being able to sing as a sort of counterpart to that statement. It is also, in a way, a confused philosophical work like Die Jakobsleiter, but musically it's very much worth listening to. The whole beginning with Moses, it's supposed to be the scene of the burning bush, which is represented by a chorus that's singing all over the place in this nebulous way, and that represents the voice of God speaking to Moses, and Moses answers in this very low speaking voice. But I want to go on and play a little bit of what was Schoenberg's own favorite orchestral work from his 12-tone period, which went right through to the end of his life, and that is the violin concerto. The violin concerto, if I can just find a little bit about that. It's a very difficult work to listen to the first time. if you bear with it, if you listen to it a few times, you begin to understand the beauty of it. It took me until I heard Hilary Hahn's recording of it with Esa-Pekka Salonen to really grasp the romanticism of it. And this is very important because Schoenberg is a romantic composer. He's not a bull in a china shop who's trying to knock everything apart. As the statement before indicates, his idea was he was part of this long chain of great German composers, and he wanted to take that tradition ahead. Now, of course, the Germans kicked him out in 1933 and forced him to emigrate, and he ended up in California, which I forget the exact phrase he called, forced into paradise. He didn't use the word forced, I forget what it was, but in any case, he taught at UCLA, he taught at USC, he had many important pupils there. One of his pupils at UCLA was Jackie Robinson, the baseball player. And he was very proud when Jackie Robinson got into the Brooklyn Dodgers, the first black player in the major leagues. I don't think Jackie Robinson was a serious composition student, but he took some music theory classes with Schoenberg. So, and Schoenberg in California, he became very friendly with George Gershwin. They played tennis together. So, this is the latter part of his life. But the violin concerto, I'm going to play you a bit of the second movement, which is very lyrical, but you have to think. This is a very lyrical piece of music, and try to hear it that way. to stop there. It's a beautiful piece, beautifully played also. I think I would like to end with a track that Schoenberg's son, Larry, who is now 83, showed me last year, and it's Bluegrass Schoenberg.
So Merle, we got 30 minutes of studio time left. Have you got anything that's ready to go?
The one on how hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic led to the rise of fascism is ready to go.
The economic bluegrass is just not really where the kids are at these days. Anything besides that?
Yeah, I got one on atonal music.
Anything else?
Nope.
All right, let's give it a listen.
Okay, guys, let's go. I dedicate this song to my father. My dad was a composer, modern was his style. His music always made you think, it never made you smile. He wrote for chamber orchestra, now and then for voice. Tonality in Daddy's world was just another choice. Del Papa's compositions came in rigid 12-tone rows. There was no tonal center to the music he'd composed. He was a lover of complexity, some have said pretense. His music wasn't joyful, it was just abstract and dense. Give me some of that old atonal music, it lingers in my ears. Schoenberg and Albenberg were the genre's pioneers. You can keep your Bach and Chopin, they're melodic and passé. Give me some of that old atonal music, like Daddy used to play. Give him some, Allison. That's right. Since dear old Daddy left us, life has been so hard. There aren't enough musicians who embrace the avant-garde. No one plays atonally in their home or on the stage. I miss Igor Stravinsky, my dad, and old John Cage. Give me some of that old atonal music, like my daddy used to write. It was hard to sing if you rehearsed impossible by sight. Emotion is for simple folk, art should be arcane. Some compositions feed the heart, my daddy's fed the brain. Give me some of that old atonal music, how I love those random hops. I've tried to write that way myself, but I'm not as skilled as Pops. You can keep your Brahms and Chopin, they're melodic and passé. Give me some of that old atonal music, like Daddy used to play. I miss you, Daddy.
Pardon me? No, Larry Schoenberg told me about this. Actually, the guy's name, his stage name is Merle Hazard, not Haggard. But he's actually a financial planner, I think, whose name is Jonathan Shane, and he was at my talk in California that Larry Schoenberg came to. I had never seen this before. Anyway, I just want to end with a statement that Schoenberg himself made in a letter to someone who was showing signs of interest in his music. This was back in the 1930s, I think. He said, "You can see it isn't easy to get on with me, but don't lose heart because of that." And I think that's a signal that we can all listen to. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for like one or two questions if
Oh,
there is
yes.
one.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If there are any
Wait for the
questions,
mic.
I probably can't answer them, but I'll try.
So first, a comment that you were saying about half an audience walking out at a concert. I experienced the same thing there was a Mendelssohn Hindemith concert. I went for the Hindemith, but I don't know why they programmed the Hindemith second and half the audience left. So I'm curious because Hindemith, I think, strikes the same kind of fear based on that reaction as Schoenberg.
And yet he's a completely tonal composer.
Yeah.
Hindemith was tonal. He was in some ways radical, but yeah.
So I'm curious also about this perhaps resurgence now, because to me, Schoenberg now sounds so much more ear appealing in view of all of the extended techniques and some of the other, to my ears, a little less. So if there is some anticipation of overcoming that ingrained fear for lack of knowledge, do you think that there is a greater acceptance coming of?
Don't know. It's very hard to say. I mean, we have now especially in this country, a growing crisis in classical music in general. And the question, one of the questions in my mind is, does one try to eliminate or at least reduce that problem by watering down the kind of programming that's being done, which is what a lot of institutions seem to be doing, or does one try to keep the challenge going, except maybe presenting things in a more approachable way and, making the concert experience less formal and that sort of thing? It's an open question, and it's one that I think has to be solved relatively quickly before all these institutions start to disappear. So, yeah, it's a very difficult question. And with Schoenberg and company in particular, we will see. I think maybe the fact that so much of his music is being performed this year, thanks to the anniversary, may help to make more people want to hear it. On the other hand, maybe it'll have the opposite effect. It's very, very difficult to say.
Can I ask, in terms of historical, so he was kind of an elder statesman for the Blauer Reiter group, because he was older than Kandinsky, for example.
A little
and
bit, yeah.
The others. And I'm wondering, but they were all kind of into this manifesto, new invention.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, in terms of his artwork, in addition to his music and fitting in with these others, how does the sort of sociology of wanting to create sort of a manifesto, create something new that several of these creative folks did, what was going on in terms of this manifesto mania in some sense?
Yeah, well, I'm really not a specialist in that area, but I can tell you that, yes, he did start painting around 1907. He thought, he wasn't making any money as a composer, and he thought that if he could learn to do portrait painting, maybe he would do better at that. And Mahler, without letting it be known, bought some of his paintings to help him. But Kandinsky thought he was a fine painter, And then there's the whole story, his painting teacher was Richard Gerstel, this budding, very talented young Austrian painter who then had an affair with Schoenberg's wife. and was ostracized from Schoenberg's circle and committed suicide and burned most of his own works as well. So it's a story that has a tragic side to it as well. As far as the manifesto goes, I don't know, because, you know, I think the Blauer Reiter School were intentionally doing things that were revolutionary. And Schoenberg, as a musician, saw himself as part of the natural evolution of Germanic, in particular, music, which he considered to be much more profound than any other national music. And yeah, you know, I mean, Stravinsky was the real revolutionary, in my opinion, because Stravinsky puts rhythm on an equal basis with harmony, melody, and form. And yet, Stravinsky, until his 70s, did not try to write in anything but tonal music. His forms and approach were very revolutionary, but not harmonically, and that's why his music is still more acceptable today than the so-called Second Viennese School, Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah?
The best response I heard given to what Schoenberg gave to music was given here by Gunther Schuller about 13 years ago. It's summing up a lot, but he said Schoenberg gave a chromaticism to music that enriched composers' palates that he appreciated having, and he used as a source up to his death. What would you say, Harvey, to a composer like Giancarlo Menotti, who said he could not write in the 12-tone style because you could not express joy with it? Do you find works of Schoenberg or other 12-tone works that would give a counter-argument to that?
I mean, certainly that's not what was intended. Schoenberg thought that through his music he was expressing the same range of emotions that tonal composers were expressing. I know musicians, some very close to me, who, you know, also say, all I hear in it is angst. I hear, you know, I can hear when he's trying to be lyrical, but it doesn't, I don't feel anything but angst in the sound combination. I don't agree with that, but I can understand how some people do. And yeah, I understand what Gunther Schuller was saying, but I'm not in total agreement with it.
Thanks, everybody. We need to stop there now.
Okay. Thank you.